August 14th, 1943, 2130 hours. Bristol, England. Light rain, fog, rolling off the Severn. Private Thomas Reed, of the 1698th Engineer Combat Battalion, tightens the last bolt on the Bailey Bridge section, water dripping from his helmet. His crew has been working since 0500, 18 hours straight, replacing a span destroyed by German bombing 2 nights ago. The bridge must open by midnight. Rail traffic, supply convoys, troop movements, all waiting. Across the worksite, a British Home Guard officer watches, clipboard in hand. He'd filed a complaint when the American command sent a black battalion. Unsuitable for technical work, the report said. Reed tests the joint. Perfect alignment. He signals his foreman. The section locks into place. The Home Guard officer walks closer, studies the work, checks his watch. Ahead of schedule, he mutters. Reed wipes his hands on a rag, pulls out his wrench, standard issue, carried since Fort Belvoir, and clips it back to his belt. The bridge opens at 2300. 0 defects. Performance doesn't require permission. If you're ready for the history they tried to erase and nearly succeeded, hit subscribe. This story almost didn't survive. The official narrative was carefully managed. British authorities, coordinating with American command, worked to minimize friction between white and black American troops stationed in Britain. Friction meant acknowledging difference. Acknowledgement meant documentation. Documentation meant evidence that could complicate the alliance. So reports were sanitized. Commendations were delayed. Excellence was noted quietly, internally, and then filed away. The expectation, shared across the Atlantic, was that black soldiers would serve adequately in support roles. Labor, transportation, construction. The invisible work that kept armies moving but earned no headlines. Combat, leadership, technical expertise. Those required qualities that prejudice insisted they lacked. Jim Crow traveled in duffel bags and official memos, segregated units, separate facilities, doubted competence. The same assumptions that defined Mississippi and Georgia now applied in Somerset and Kent. But reality has a way of leaking through official silence. September 1943, build-up to D-Day, construction projects across southern England. The 1698th Engineer Combat Battalion builds roads, bridges, supply depots, infrastructure for the coming invasion. They work faster than projected timelines. Their structures exceed specifications. Their safety record is flawless. British engineers working alongside them take notice. Private Reed's crew completes a reinforced bridge in 5 days. Projected timeline was 8. A British Royal Engineer Captain, Williams, inspects the work personally. "Your welds," Williams says, running his hand along a joint. "These are excellent." Reed nods. "Yes, sir." Williams looks at the crew. 12 black soldiers, mud-covered, exhausted, standing by their work. "I was told you'd need supervision, extended timelines." Reed pulls his wrench from his belt, wipes it clean. It's become a ritual, the tool he uses to build what they said he couldn't. "They tell you a lot of things, sir." Williams writes a report to his commanding officer. The 1698th ECB exhibits superior technical proficiency and discipline. Recommend continued assignment to critical infrastructure projects. The report goes up the chain, gets filed, no public acknowledgement, but the work continues, and the work speaks. The US military that occupied Britain from 1942 onward was rigidly segregated. Executive Order 8802 prohibited discrimination in defense industries but left military segregation intact. Black soldiers served in separate units, trained at separate facilities, lived under separate rules. Of approximately 1.2 million black Americans who served in World War II, the overwhelming majority were assigned to service and supply roles, quartermaster companies, port battalions, engineer units, the essential but unglamorous work that modern war demanded. The Army Air Forces maintained segregation in pilot training, hence Tuskegee. The Navy restricted black sailors to mess steward duties until 1944. The Marine Corps didn't accept black recruits until mid-1942, and then only under pressure. British military authorities received briefings from American command. Expect discipline problems, limited initiative, inadequate performance under stress. These briefings shaped expectations. They also shaped policy. British command planned around assumed incompetence, longer timelines, additional supervision, restricted assignments. The assumptions were wrong, but proving them wrong required more than competence. It required excellence so consistent that silence became impossible. March 1944. Bougainville, Solomon Islands. Dense jungle, oppressive heat, constant patrol. The 93rd Infantry Division, one of only 2 black infantry divisions to see combat in World War II, operates in the Pacific Theater. The terrain is brutal. Jungle so thick, visibility drops to 10 feet. Mud that swallows equipment. Disease that kills as efficiently as bullets. Staff Sergeant Daniel Porter leads his squad on a reconnaissance patrol. They've been in the bush for 6 days. No contact. Just movement, observation, mapping enemy positions. On day 7, they encounter a Japanese patrol. 15 enemy soldiers. Porter's squad, 8 men. The firefight lasts 4 minutes. Porter's squad, 0 casualties. Japanese patrol neutralized. An Australian infantry officer, attached to the division as liaison, reaches the position 2 hours later. He examines the ambush site, the tactical positions, the controlled fire discipline. "Your boys," the Australian says, "they train like this?" Porter reloads his rifle, checks his squad. "Every day, sir." The Australian nods slowly. "I was told American Negro troops weren't ready for jungle combat." Porter doesn't smile. "We're here, sir." The Australian files a report to his command. It notes exceptional tactical discipline and combat effectiveness. The report gets forwarded to British Pacific Command, gets noted, gets filed. The 93rd continues operations, continues proving what command didn't expect. The invasion of Europe depended on logistics, ammunition, fuel, food, medical supplies, replacement vehicles, millions of tons flowing from Britain to France. Black port battalions handled the majority of this tonnage. The 490th Port Battalion at Southampton averaged 12,000 tons of cargo per day. The 496th at Liverpool, 15,000 tons daily. The efficiency ratings exceeded white port battalions by measurable margins. Corporal James Washington operates a forklift at Southampton docks. He's from Alabama. Scored top marks in equipment operator school. Got assigned to a port battalion because that's where black soldiers went. He loads a Liberty ship in 8 hours. Standard time is 10. A British dock supervisor, Mr. Clark, watches from the pier. Clark has worked these docks since 1920. He knows efficiency. "You're faster than the last battalion," Clark says during a break. Washington drinks from his canteen, wipes his mouth. "Same cargo, sir. Just work steady." Clark hesitates then. The ministry gets reports on all port operations. "Your battalion's numbers?" "They're exceptional." Washington caps his canteen. That's so? Yes, Clark says, but the reports don't mention you're colored. They just say Port Battalion 490, as if that's all that matters. Washington looks at Clark, understanding the statement. Maybe that's all that should matter, sir. Clark nods. Maybe it is. The reports continue. Numbers without context. Excellence without attribution. The truth hidden in aggregate statistics. But the truth was there. Documented. Undeniable. June 1944, Normandy. Field Hospital, 10 kilometers from the front. Lieutenant Grace Morrison, Army Nurse Corps, works her 4th consecutive shift. The wounded keep coming. American, British, Canadian, German POWs. Blood doesn't discriminate. She's one of 12 black nurses assigned to this field hospital. They treat everyone. They save who can be saved. A British paratrooper, shrapnel in chest and abdomen, arrives in critical condition. Morrison assists in surgery for 6 hours. The soldier survives. 3 days later, the paratrooper's commanding officer visits the hospital. Major Hastings, 6th Airborne Division. He asks to meet the surgical team. Morrison steps forward, still in scrubs. Hastings extends his hand. Major Hastings, you helped save my man. Morrison shakes his hand. Part of the team, sir. Hastings glances at the other nurses, the doctors, then back to Morrison. I'm writing a commendation. May I have your name and rank? Lieutenant Grace Morrison, sir. But the whole team... I'll mention everyone, Hastings says. But I want your name specifically. My man said, you talked him through the worst of it. Kept him conscious. Kept him fighting. Morrison pulls a small photograph from her pocket. Her nursing school graduation, 1941, segregated program in Georgia. She keeps it as a reminder of where she started, of what she's proven. Thank you, sir, she says. Hastings files the commendation. It reaches British Medical Command. Gets noted, gets filed quietly. Morrison keeps the photo, keeps working, keeps saving lives. British civilians didn't enforce American segregation. They didn't understand it. Pubs in the Midlands served black soldiers alongside British soldiers. Families in East Anglia invited them for Sunday dinner. Children played with them in village squares. This enraged American military police. They attempted to impose Jim Crow in British towns, separate areas in pubs, restricted access to certain establishments. British pub owners refused. A pub in Warwickshire posted a sign. We serve all soldiers of the Allied forces equally. Those who cannot accept this are invited to drink elsewhere. White American MPs threatened citations. The pub owner, Mr. Davies, veteran of the Great War, told them to leave. They did. Private Leon Matthews, 827th Engineer Aviation Battalion, wrote home to South Carolina, "The British treat me like a man in uniform. Nothing special, nothing less, just a soldier. I never knew what that felt like until I left America." The contrast was devastating and clarifying. It proved that segregation wasn't natural law, it was American choice. And if Britain could see past it, eventually America would have to. You're watching history they tried to bury in bureaucracy and silence. If this truth matters, and it does, subscribe now. Don't let them hide it again. Every black soldier carried a dual mission. The Pittsburgh Courier's WWII campaign, victory over fascism abroad, victory over racism at home, wasn't just slogan. It was psychological framework. Moral necessity. Sergeant Robert Hayes, 366th Infantry Regiment, wrote in his journal, "We fight Germans who believe in a master race. Then We return to base and eat in separate mess halls because white soldiers believe in a master race. The irony is bitter. The mission remains. British soldiers who fought alongside Black American units often noted the tension. One British corporal wrote to his family, "The American Negro soldiers are fine troops, disciplined, brave, capable, but their own army treats them as second class. It's difficult to watch. We fight for freedom, but they don't have it." The WWII wasn't contradiction. It was strategy. Prove competence in war. Demand recognition in peace. The British officers who understood this complexity respected it. The ones who dismissed it never understood what they were witnessing. Not all British officers started as skeptics. Some were observers. Some learned. Captain Peter Whitmore, Royal Engineers, commanded a construction unit working with the 1698th Engineer Combat Battalion throughout 1943 and 44. Whitmore wrote in a letter to his wife, "I've worked with a dozen engineer battalions in this war. The 1698th is the finest I've seen. That they're American Negroes seems to matter greatly to the Americans. It matters not at all to the bridges they build or the roads they pave. I've requested they remain assigned to my projects. If command asks why, I'll tell them, because they're the best." When American command attempted to reassign the 1698th to labor-only duties, no more technical work, Whitmore protested directly to British Engineering Command. "You're removing my most effective construction unit," he wrote. "This isn't logistics. This is prejudice, and it's interfering with the war effort." The reassignment was quietly shelved. Whitmore wasn't a crusader. He was an engineer who recognized that competence transcends race. But in that moment, engineering became justice. Not every black soldier accepted discrimination quietly. In Bristol, 1943, a group of black soldiers from the 1696th Engineer Combat Battalion attempted to enter a Red Cross club designated Whites Only. American Red Cross, funded by public donation, operating on British soil, enforcing Jim Crow. The soldiers knew the regulation. They entered anyway. Military police arrested 15 men. Courts-martial followed. Sentences ranged from demotion to dishonorable discharge. British newspapers covered the incident. Questions were raised in Parliament. Why are American racial policies being enforced on British soil? The answer was diplomatic necessity, alliance management, avoiding friction. But the questions lingered, and the documentation accumulated. Private First Class William Turner, one of the 15, said in a 1978 interview, "We knew the cost, we paid it, but we also knew someone had to say, 'This is wrong,' even if it costs us everything, especially then." The resistance was quiet, persistent, documented. It created a record that would matter later. Field reports began contradicting briefings. British engineers requested specific black battalions for technical projects. Australian infantry commanders praised black reconnaissance units. Canadian medical officers commended black medics and nurses. Commendations arrived, not proportional to performance, not adequate, but real. By late 1944, British command routinely assigned black American units to critical operations without the extended supervision previously mandated. The 1698th Engineer Combat Battalion received a commendation from British 21st Army Group for exceptional technical proficiency and operational discipline. The commendation was filed, not publicized, but documented. Private Reed's wrench, the one he carried through every project, every bridge, every impossible deadline, became his proof. Not official, not recognized publicly, but real. The numbers told the story that words suppressed. Efficiency ratings, completion times, safety records, tonnage moved, lives saved. Excellence, once documented, cannot be undocumented. May 8, 1945. VE Day, Bristol, England. Private Thomas Reed sits on a dock wall, watching the Severn, listening to Churchill's radio address. The war in Europe is over. His battalion is packing for home. His friend, Corporal Jackson, sits beside him. "What you think happens now?" Reed pulls out his wrench, turns it over in his hands. He's carried it for 3 years. Built bridges, roads, depots, proven everything they said he couldn't. "Can't go back to pretending," Reed says. "Not after this." "They'll try," Jackson says. Reed clips the wrench back to his belt. "They'll fail." It wasn't optimism. It was certainty, born of evidence. In a 1980 oral history, Reed said, "We knew the fight wasn't over. We knew going home meant going back to segregation. But we also knew we'd created a record. Reports, statistics, commendations, buried in files, but there. Eventually, someone would read them. Eventually, the truth would leak out. We'd make sure of it." The equation was clear. Service plus documentation equals eventual recognition. Not immediate, not easy, but inevitable. They returned home in 1945 and 46, some to welcome, most to silence. The GI Bill promised opportunity. Southern states found ways to deny it. Universities imposed quotas. Banks refused loans. The promise became selective, but they persisted, and they organized. Private Thomas Reed became Thomas Reed Sr., civil engineer in Philadelphia. He worked on bridges, highways, public infrastructure. His son became an architect. His granddaughter became a structural engineer, worked on projects her grandfather would have recognized. The veterans of the 1698th, the 93rd, the port battalions, the field hospitals, they joined civil rights organizations. They testified before Congress about discrimination. They filed lawsuits. They organized. The documentation they'd created during the war, the reports, the commendations, the efficiency ratings, became evidence in desegregation cases decades later. The British officers who'd worked with them sent letters, testified about competence, pushed for racial equality in their own services. The alliance continued. The evidence accumulated. The truth leaked out, slowly, persistently, undeniably. Britain tried to hide it, filed the reports, downplayed the excellence, maintained the silence. But documentation has a way of surviving. Numbers don't lie. Performance creates evidence that cannot be destroyed, only suppressed. And suppression is temporary. Black soldiers in World War II didn't just serve. They created an irrefutable record. Bridges that stood, tonnage that moved, lives that were saved, battles that were won. The record was filed, quietly, carefully, as if silence could erase truth. It couldn't. The thesis was always simple. Courage and competence shatter prejudice. Service demands recognition. Excellence, once documented, becomes inevitable justice. Somewhere, in a quiet apartment in Philadelphia, Thomas Reed Sr. keeps a toolbox in his garage. Inside, his original service wrench from the 1698th Engineer Combat Battalion, still oiled, still ready. The tool that built what they said couldn't be built. He doesn't use it anymore, doesn't need to. The bridges are still standing. The record still exists. The truth leaked out. This is the story they buried in file cabinets and official silence. The history that survived anyway. Subscribe Make sure it never gets buried again. Truth, once documented, waits patiently to be found.